There are few authors that are as synonymous with cosmic horror as HP Lovecraft. With 65 different tales written over his relatively short career that mostly come in the form of novellas and short stories, Lovecraft's ruminations on ancient gods, mind-warping horrors, and the ever-looming end of the world created a sort of dark vision of our place in the cosmos that has left fans haunted for generations. Over the decades, there have been many different film adaptations of HP Lovecraft's stories, and even more films inspired by them. But only a handful have been truly successful in capturing the cosmic terror that made Lovecraft's work so impactful. Really, when you consider films based on Lovecraft, most come with a big what if attached to it. And the biggest what if comes in the form of director and writer Guillermo Del Toro's Unmade adaptation of one of Lovecraft's most famous pieces, At the Mountains of Madness. Now, Del Toro and canceled projects are no strangers. In fact, last year I almost did a video for Halloween on every single canceled Del Toro movie, but when I found out there was more than 60 films, I put a pause on that. I'm sure I'll do it sooner or later. But there's no movie quite like At the Mountains of Madness in his filmography, and I think a lot of people really want to see it made. But what would it have been like, and could it have done justice to Lovecraft's story? Well, the good news is that I've got the script by Del Toro and Matthew Robbins, and I'm going to take you through both its story and the production problems that kept it from being made when it was so close to filming. Let's dive into the world of HP Lovecraft, the frustrations of Guillermo Del Toro, and the story of this unmade adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. Before we get to the script itself, I think it's important to understand the story that started it all, At the Mountains of Madness, one of H.P. Lovecraft's final published works, and a story that was originally published across several issues of Astounding Stories in 1936. Inspired by the then ongoing Antarctic exploration of the last continent not fully mapped by man, At the Mountains of Madness is written in first-person narration by geologist William Dyer, a 56-year-old professor from Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts, two fictional locations that are central to much of Lovecraft's mythos. The story is told as a warning by Dyer, who went on a disastrous Antarctic expedition and is now telling everything he kept secret in the hopes of stopping another expedition from enduring the same fate. Dyer, along with many other scholars, explores previously unseen regions of Antarctica in the hopes of finding fossils older than any found before. And they do, only to also uncover well-preserved fossils of strange, prehistoric life forms older than and unlike anything else on Earth. These massive flying tentacled starfish-like creatures with the ability to speak become labeled as Elder Ones, due to similar descriptions in the Necronomicon, a book of magic and strange history seen in many other Lovecraft tales. However, a group led by Professor Lake that found these fossils is soon slaughtered as the creatures come back to life, dissecting them and disappearing. The search for more information leads to Dyer and graduate student Danforth flying over the Mountains of Madness, which act as a giant wall for a massive abandoned stone city where the Elder Ones once lived. The majority of the rest of the novella is the duo's exploration of the city, where they come to learn that the Elder Ones are ancient aliens that came to Earth millennia ago, using the protoplasmic shape-shifting Shoggoth to build the city and eventually create life on Earth from their leftover cells. The overall sweep of At the Mountains of Madness is a scholarly researcher's collision with a mind-melting new understanding of the truth of the world. Wars with Cthulhu, the Migo, and the rebellion of the Shoggoths are all seen through hieroglyphics that tell of this ancient society's downfall, with Dyer and Danforth finding the remains of slaughtered Elder Ones, gigantic penguins used as livestock, and the only living alien creature we see in the entire story, a Shoggoth, which is massive, constantly shifting form as protoplasmic bubbles, is impossible to describe and only cries one word: Tekeli Li, Tekeli Li. It all breaks Dyer and Danforth's minds, but as they escape the city and fly away, Danforth looks back to see an even greater evil feared by the Elder Ones in an even more massive mountain range beyond the city. He never says what he saw, but it's enough to permanently drive him mad. While Lovecraft wasn't financially successful during his life, his creations continued to grow in popularity over the following years, especially as more and more mainstream art used his creations and influence in popular works. However, Mountains of Madness has never received an official feature film adaptation, Largely considered to be unadaptable, the scale and strangeness of the story has largely turned off studios from attempting to make it into a movie. That is, until 2006, when Guillermo Del Toro announced that he was beginning development on an adaptation of the story for Universal Pictures. Del Toro had been a lifelong Lovecraft fan, and it's very evident in all his films. And even at the beginning of his career, Mountains of Madness was his dream project. It's a very, very serious endeavor to me. I take my tentacles very seriously. At this point, Del Toro was coming off the back-to-back successes of The Devil's Backbone, low-key one of his best, Blade 2, It Rips, Hellboy, I love it obviously, and Pan's Labyrinth, which won multiple Academy Awards. However, the project was soon put into turnaround, meaning the project needed outside assistance to move forward, because of the projected cost. However, on July 28, 2010, Del Toro announced Madness was once again moving forward with the help of James Cameron, you know, the Piranha 2 guy, as producer. And this is where we get to a script co-written by Del Toro and Matthew Robbins, who previously wrote films such as The Sugarland Express and Batteries Not Included, as well as Del Toro's Mimic, and eventually Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, Crimson Peak, and Pinocchio for the director. Okay, enough with the background. Let's get on to the movie. Del Toro and Robbins' script begins in October of 1939 off the coast of Hobart, Tasmania, as Aboriginal Australian fishermen come into contact with a huge derelict whaling ship named the Arkham. Soon, Australian patrolmen board the boat and find its decks destroyed and covered in blood. All they find is a cluster of mummified dogs fused into a hatchway, and old film cans that reveal the ship is from Miskatonic University's Antarctic expedition from 1930. The patrolmen are able to smash open a door locked from the inside and find an old man locked within, gone mad and attacking them with an axe to stop them from touching human remains merged into the bulkhead, until he's shot, with the shock bringing him back to awareness. From there we cut to Sullivan's Cove in Tasmania and the freighter HMS Moonstone, captained by Alan Starkweather. We soon learn that the Arkham disappeared almost a decade ago alongside its sister ship the Miskatonic, as Starkweather and a local British consul visit the strange man locked down in a military hospital. Starkweather is already on a mission to reach Antarctica before the Nazis can, but this crazed man, who sees visions of himself exploding into a mass of wet pseudopods, our first hint of the type of horror to come, warns them to stay away from the continent. It's here that we find out he is Professor William Dyer, who was 25 years old when the expedition left America, and we're pulled into a flashback beginning in September 1930 in Arkham, Massachusetts, that will be the majority of the film to come. The leader of the expedition is the charismatic 62-year-old Professor Gilman Lake. Okay, he's definitely turning into the creature from the Black Lagoon, who is intent on discovering fossils that unlock the origin of all species and answers to the very nature of man. We also find out that Dyer has a wife named Anne who is pregnant and expected to give birth to their child soon. But Dyer's unending loyalty to Lake has pushed him to leave on the expedition. A little personal drama to contrast the cosmic horror to come. Lake, Dyer, and another participant, Danforth, inspect a crate that has just arrived containing a massive partial fossil of a strange creature unlike anything else on Earth. Very little of it is actually described in the script, so obviously the final look would be up to Del Toro and his designers. But that's also the challenge of making a movie like this, isn't it? This creature is unlike anything you've ever seen before. Okay, so now make a movie monster that's never been seen in any film before. Not so easy to do. Also, this means that Lake already knows there are ancient beings in the Antarctic, which is a big change from the book, where the expedition has no idea what they're getting into. The find convinces Dyer to leave his wife behind, with 2 ships and several planes arriving in the Antarctic Circle by October. All of this, by the way, is intermittently narrated by the old Dyer, reflecting on his story. The Arkham is piloted by Captain Douglas and his second-in-command Higgins, and the expedition crew includes engineer Pabodie, meteorologist Moulton, zoologist Gordon, chemist Fowler, newsreel cameraman Bob Gedney, his 17-year-old brother Pip, and 2 dog handlers Ian Larson, a brawler with a hearing aid, and Jan Gunnarsson, a Dane with metal teeth. There's actually even more crew that's introduced here, but not all of them end up being all that important or even distinguishable from one another. By November 8th, the crew has been heavily drilling into glaciers and discovers tons of ancient marine life fossils. And on New Year's Eve, Lake and the captain receive a message that both Anne and the baby died in childbirth. But Lake decides to hide this news from Dyer. Meanwhile, Dyer has a dream of Anne and his baby that turns sour, with their home ripped apart to reveal ice all around, and the baby in the crib covered in tentacles. I felt utterly alone and lost. Alone in the whole wide world. Unfathomable silence all around me. And then, for the first time, I saw the Dark Man. And when Dyer awakens from his nightmare, he finds that he's grown gaunt and grown a beard, as everyone else on board the ship is asleep, and the Arkham is running full steam ahead, crashing into an icy shore as the captain is too late to stop it. With the vessel wedged in with giant hunks of sea ice and at our titular destination, the film's title card pops on screen here at page 28. So, as you can see, there's already big changes from the book. A very different version of Lake, personal drama for Dyer, strange time and space distortions, and visions of a dark man that aren't anywhere in the original text. Del Toro and Robin's script is all about making things as dark and scary as soon as possible, even if that means throwing out most of the book's detailed archaeological work. From there, the expedition begins to explore the area, seeing strange buildings at the top of the massive mountains, realizing they've traveled forward in time to January 28th, finding stone monoliths under the ice, and seeing the book's well-known giant blind albino penguins. Eventually, the crew pulls up a monolith and realizes they're actually coffins, prying one open with a crack. The stone falls into two perfect halves. A stream of green, viscous liquid spills out, and a carcass slithers to the floor. The men cover their noses. It's here where we move into a Del Toro staple, a gross-out dissection of a gooey monster, with Dyer and Fowler not noticing the wounds on the monster beginning to heal afterward. Meanwhile, the dog handlers have killed one of the giant penguins to feed the animals, but something hiding in the fog and making strange sounds kills the dogs. Arctic horror and huskies getting torn apart. They go hand in hand. But things, get it? Things, are about to get much worse. High in the mist, a dozen tendrils are waving like an undersea protoplasm. More shrill piping sounds. The back of the dog is suddenly writhing sinew. Larson realizes that the intestines are pseudopods growing from the dog's body. They coalesce into crab-like claws. The creature growls and explodes into a mass of translucent knobs, shot through with ligaments, tendons, and coiling veins. The neck propels outward, growing a series of hungry mouths. A fleshy tongue attaches to Gunnarsson and lifts him up. His gun goes off. Gunnarsson disappears into a mass of vibrating flesh, screaming, fusing with it. Larson runs away and finds the abandoned Miskatonic ship, sunk into the ice and covered with snow, with the dog handler eventually escaping the Gunnarsson thing, named as such in the script, by breaking the ice and swimming into the freezing water, with the water burning the creature. Back with the rest of the crew, Danforth reads the Necronomicon and realizes the Old Ones are here, warping time and space in the mountains, making weeks pass in minutes, explaining the constantly growing ice and the crew's weeks-long sleep. At Lake's instruction, the expedition's two planes prepare to take them to the city on top of the mountains, not behind them like in the novel, but not before the professor gives Dyer the hidden telegram about his wife and baby dying in the delivery. I'm not entirely sure what Lake's intention is, but the result is Dyer beating the crap out of him and refusing to fly into the mountains. Instead, Plane A holds Moulton the pilot, Lake, Boudreaux, Daniels, Pip, and Gedney, while Plane B has Sumner as pilot, Ropes, Atwood, Gordon, Danforth, and Pabodie. Yeah, okay, so you're confused about who most of those people are too, right? Yeah, so am I. Reading through the script, I realized that there are so many background characters that are barely established beyond a name getting mentioned at some point in this script. And the fact is that there's simply too many characters in this cast, and it makes it very obvious that this is going to become a body count movie in the second half. Unfortunately, there's just not enough time given to any of these characters to make them interesting, but also they're strangely given just a little too much time, which makes them clutter up the story when they really shouldn't be. Also, seriously, Dyer is not going to go into the mountains and see the city. In the novella, he's one of two people to actually go there, and now he's just left out of it. I mean, really, spoilers for the rest of the script, he never goes there. And also, he's telling us this in a flashback. How does he know what happened? The flight to the city goes wrong as the entire world around the plane gets all weird, with suddenly appearing mountains cutting into Plane B's fuel tank and landing gear, as the two planes are suddenly over the city described as a broad valley covered in eons of ice, bristling with towers, spires, and rooftops. The scientists stare in awe at alien architecture, indescribably ancient and strange. The buildings vary in size, evidencing innumerable honeycombed compartments, wide ramps, and hanging terraces. Yes, the city is on top of a mountain, but it's also in a valley. The torn-up Plane B crashes, killing Sumner, while Plane A safely lands. Meanwhile, the Gunnarsson thing is found by the ship crew and collapses, brought on board by unsuspecting sailors as we reach our halfway point. The film now split between two groups on the edge of discovery and death. So it's obvious that this would be a massive production, but by 2010, CGI had advanced to the point where something like this could convincingly be shot on a soundstage, but there would still need to be sets built for the ship, the ice caves, and of course the giant city, which would be really complex. And of course you would need a lot of CGI to create these monsters, which really could not be done with people in suits, which Del Toro himself said he was never considering when he was in pre-production for this movie. With Cameron on board, it was estimated that Del Toro's film would cost $150 million. Easily his most expensive at this point in his career. To counterbalance the financial gamble, Cameron brought on board Tom Cruise as the lead. You know, the guy from Ridley Scott's Legend, to star and act as the mainstream appeal of the movie. To bring the monsters to life, Del Toro hired visual effects living legend Dennis Muren, one of the leading visionaries at George Lucas's Industrial Lights and Magic, and responsible for the visual effects of films like Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible, E.T., and so much more. So having Muren on board alongside Del Toro and Cameron is kind of a dream team. With Muren saying, "You've never seen monsters like this. I'm trying to find a way to show the creatures but not show them, because you can never quite grasp what they are," said Del Toro. The film was also going to be shot in 3D, all the rage at the time for both good and bad, but also meant to further differentiate these Lovecraft monsters from anything else in film. And in 2022, Del Toro shared a CGI test for the movie that showed the concept to be pretty complex, but still very much like Carpenter's thing. Obviously, it's easy to say that this would have been the greatest looking movie of all time when nothing was ever filmed, or to say that this would have never worked. Instead, one thing that I think is striking about Del Toro and Robin's script is that there's so little detail about the creatures and locations. Really, it all comes down to the designers, visual effects, and set designs. Of course, I think all those are some of the most consistent and strongest things about Del Toro's films, and often the best things about his movies. Guillermo, I'm sorry, but the back half of your filmography is pretty weak. You peaked with Hellboy 2. Wait, sorry, someone's just entered the room. What's that? You want me to get back to talking about the movie? Okay, sure. We return to a shell-shocked Dyer brought out of his sadness by Fowler, who has found that the green embalming fluid from the monoliths is the same consistency as salt water, and was used to ward off a bigger threat. Meanwhile, the Gunnarsson thing is brought into the ship's infirmary alongside the many men injured in the crash, absorbing one crew member with a hand over the mouth like that one guy, you know what I'm talking about, and grabbing another. Back at the alien city, Lake is studying pictograms on the ancient walls that reveal the old ones are like scientists who crossed time and space and built the ancient city by using a slave race known as Shoggoths, which could grow new body parts and mimic any life form to perform a needed task. However, the Shoggoths rebelled and started a war in the name of the god they worshipped, Cthulhu. And it's here where we see our first glimpse of what is likely Lovecraft's most famous creation. At the center of the plaza, carved out of a natural pillar 100 feet high, a statue of a primordial creature, Cthulhu, a wild congeries of tentacles, claws, and wings. At the ship, pretty much all of the men on board have been absorbed, leaving just Dyer and Fowler alive in their dissection tent out on the nearby ice field. When they radio Captain Douglas, they're met with a strange response. Tekeli Lee. Tekeli Lee. This leads to a pretty cool scare as Fowler, dead meat if I've ever seen one, is preparing to dissect one of the monolith creatures when all 8 of these tall, gray, and slender beings, officially identified as Old Ones, sit up and grab him. Dyer, hearing snipping and cutting noises, finds these creatures dissecting Fowler alive on one of the autopsy tables, just as fascinated by him as he was by them. Pretty sick. Dyer escapes, pursued by an Old One and stumbling into massive chaos as the Shoggoths and surviving men fight, leading to the Old One and the Gunnarsson Shoggoth fighting, while Dyer and the suddenly arriving surviving Larson take off toward the mountains on a sled, hiding in an ice cave underneath the mountain. Back on top of it, the men draw straws for who will leave on the plane first, and who will stay behind and wait for the return trip, with Atwood, Danforth, Gedney, Daniels, and Lake chosen to return first. However, Lake volunteers to stay behind, letting young Pip go with his brother. A seeming act of kindness, but clearly due to the leader wanting to explore as much of the city as he can, seemingly set on never returning. So yeah, we're in the final act of the movie and we still have not explored the city. In fact, most of the people that get there just turn around and leave as soon as they arrive. Once again, Dyer has a nightmare of the Dark Man, now revealed to be a screaming void in the shape of a man. Awakening, Dyer helps Larson make half-salt shotgun shells, as the survivor has realized that the salt, like in seawater, burns Shoggoths like leeches. Soon, the returning plane makes a rough landing in the snow, only to be surrounded by Shoggoths that all look like Gunnarsson. The Gunnarsson thing standing in the doorway grins, but the grin expands into a massive mouth, an open snout, shining with endless rows of teeth. Arms extend like fleshy vines, grabbing Gedney. Pip screams. All the faces at the window scream too, as if in mockery. And the mouths meld and the flesh fuses, and all the hungry maws press against the window glass, like a diabolical parody of a playful child. And although Pip escapes, he goes back to help his brother, only to realize too late that Gedney is now a Shoggoth as well, grabbing him by the head and absorbing him, with every Gunnarsson, Gedney, and more forming into a giant ocean wave of flesh that absorbs more and more of the plane crew until only Danforth, Atwood, and Daniels are left. And we're back to ripping off the thing as Dyer and Larson come to the rescue, with Larson forcing the men to eat salt as a test, proving Daniels to be a Shoggoth, blowing him away with their salt shells. Back at the city, Lake and the rest walk through the ruins, climbing down massive stairs, seeing enormous sculptures of ancient gods, finding bioluminescent green tiles, seeing the destruction caused by the war, and finding the skeletal remains of countless animals. Eventually, they discover that the Old Ones were responsible for creating all life on Earth, including humans, and enter a gigantic hot machine room the size of the Roman Colosseum, filled with humming machinery and floating copper spheres. Lake realizes that the time and space distortions are coming from this machine, but when he tries to stop it, he's trapped and one of the orbs shines down a blinding light on him, turning his body translucent and finally giving us some answers in the form of a freaky flashback. He finds himself gazing over the alien city in its moment of glory. Gleaming spires, ziggurats, temples. Even the mountains look new and majestic. The lower slopes are covered in green jungle. The skies are alive with soaring star-headed creatures, gliding in majestic formation, peeling out from behind radiant golden clouds. Down, down, into a maelstrom of war. The broad, smoke-filled causeways of the city are covered with surging agglutinations of slime, which fling up long tentacles to ensnare the winged aliens and pull them in, and wrap hungry orifices over their wriggling, helpless bodies. The Shoggoths decapitate the Old Ones. Underwater, the stone coffins splash down, away from the reach of the Shoggoths. As they bob gently in the water, camera comes up. The distant mountains are in flames. On the horizon, amidst columns of smoke, a massive thing, as tall as the mountains, seems to undulate. Lake realizes that the Old Ones' bodies were sealed in the monoliths to keep them safe from the Shoggoths, who need their bodies for a summoning. But before Lake can try to signal the ship to leave and not remove the monoliths, he and all the remaining crew in the city are devoured by jump-scaring Shoggoths. That's a massive disappointment. In total, we're in the city for about 15 minutes of this 2-hour movie. Are you kidding me? That's the point of the entire novel. More than half of that book is spent just exploring the city and finding out what exactly is going on. Instead, we're just in a movie that's about fighting aliens in the snow and on a ship. That can be anything, like anything at all. The city it's right there. It's right there. Go to it. Go to the city. Show me the city. I understand that would probably up the cost of this production a lot more, but trim something else. Trim the giant ship crash, okay? And give me more time. 10 minutes left in the city. 10 more. How about that? Anything? I'm getting frustrated with this script. I'm sorry. Anyway, back to the heroes on the ground. Dyer, Atwood, Larson, and Danforth sneak into the Miskatonic to get a supply of dynamite to blow apart the cracked peninsula the Arkham is stuck on. However, Atwood, our Christian of the group, sneaks off to a chapel inside the ship to grab a Bible. Okay, sure, whatever. Only to be confronted by a Shoggoth in Lake's form that grabs him and melds him. But not before destroying his religious beliefs by revealing it was the Old Ones that made man, not God. The changed Atwood then rejoins the group as a spy as they set dynamite to blow apart a crevasse and destroy the peninsula as the Shoggoths begin a ritual with stone symbols and the dead bodies of the exhumed Old Ones that creates a green aurora australis over the mountains. And although the Atwood thing tries to sabotage the dynamite, Larson sacrifices himself to blow it up. The entire ice shelf that the things and ship are on collapses into the ocean, with the salt water burning and killing the monsters as Dyer and Danforth fight to the now loose Arkham ship. Eventually, the pair make it, only for Cthulhu to rise, so huge that it looms over the massive mountains, stretching out its miles-long wings and silhouetted by lightning in what would easily be the most memorable moment of the film. And again, something that doesn't remotely happen in the novel. The writhing Cthulhu looms over the ship, black against the starry sky. The creature squeezes the vessel, bending steel plates, popping rivets. It plucks the Arkham from the river, and cracks it like a boiled egg. Dozens of fleshy organs explode into the mess hall, the cabins, the bridge. Slow motion, the Arkham tumbles slowly through the air, thrown by the thing. The ship comes down with a huge splash. It's pure chaos, but the seawater rushing into the ship has the benefit of destroying every Shoggoth left on board. In a similar beat to the book, Danforth looks out a porthole and sees a mind-snapping image. Yeah, he sees Cthulhu, but he also sees something else. Something that a lake thing who no-clips into the scene says is the future. The lake thing also says that what he saw was the Dark Man from Dyer's dreams, saying, "The Dark Man is us, for one of us can contain all. Indeed, our name is Legion. You may warn everyone, there will be others who will come here. The Old Ones gave you pride. Pride was their downfall. It will be yours. It's only a matter of time, and we have all the time in the world." Yeah, none of that makes any sense. Danforth manages to shoot and kill Lake, but not before he's infected. Slowly changing, he begs Dyer to kill him before it's too late, which he does, with Danforth dying in his arms as we realize we're back at the beginning of the movie. The time distortions have made a decade pass during the fight. And dumbly, as Dyer finishes his story, Starkweather says that he is simply insane and killed everyone on the expedition, leaving him in the asylum and off to start his own Antarctic trip. The last few minutes of the film show Starkweather's ship heading to Antarctica, with the captain receiving word that Dyer hanged himself in his cell. But he doesn't really give a shit. Once on land, Starkweather investigates the bloody remains of the expedition, but all his men go missing. And then he sees it, blurry at first, but then more clearly. A hooded figure coming toward him through the snow. Closer and closer. The face remains in shadow. In the sky, the clouds begin to churn at super speed. Camera pulls back until the two figures are alone in the vast white plain, dwarfed by the mountains of madness. And at the end of days will come a man that walks like a man, looks like a man, but is not a man. Fade to black. So, about that script. It has like zippy zap to do with Lovecraft's story. You're telling me that this is Del Toro's dream project? That the movie he's always wanted to make is an adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness, and instead he chooses to do this. This is a Thing ripoff. It has nothing to do with the actual story. To be fair, there are apparently later drafts of this script than the version available online, which you can read for yourself in a link below. But I don't know how different they actually are. This version is so much more about action and goopy thrills than the mind-bending discoveries of Lovecraft's story. And like I mentioned earlier, barely any of this movie actually takes place in the ancient city that's so thoroughly explored in the novella. That's a huge missed opportunity. So much so that I don't think there's much point to actually having this be an adaptation. The choice to make the Shoggoths into an all-consuming Thing ripoff really screams mainstream blockbuster. Sure, maybe audiences don't like to see a crazy puddle monster for 1 minute in their movie and that's it, but there's absolutely nothing in Lovecraft's story that shows all this as an element of these creatures. Instead, it's all jump scares, explosions, and tentacles that are described more like Carpenter and Botine's things than anything in the novella. But in June of 2010, Del Toro announced that Universal was not moving forward with his adaptation, feeling as though the size of the budget, the film's need for an R rating, and Del Toro's shaky box office records did not justify making the movie. "It doesn't look like I can do it," said Del Toro. "It's very difficult for the studios to take the step of doing a period-set, R-rated tentpole movie with a tough ending and no love story. Lovecraft has a readership as big as any bestseller, but it's tough to quantify because his works are in the public domain. The R rating was what made it. If Mountains had been PG-13, or I had said PG-13, I'm too much of a Boy Scout. I should have lied, but I didn't. Would Del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness been a hit or critically well received if it actually got made? As its own unique story, I think it's fine. It's a little underdeveloped, but the action and the set pieces are solid. And of course, the creatures probably would have looked really cool with Murin on board. And I think a lot of the anticipation around this movie was for people to see what Del Toro would have done with an HP Lovecraft story. And yeah, it probably would have looked pretty cool. As for the quality of the story itself, I don't have a lot of confidence in this version of the script. Over the following decade, Del Toro would have a lot of ups and downs, making Pacific Rim for WB only for its underperformance to lock him out of the franchise's future, winning Best Picture for The Shape of Water at Fox Searchlight Pictures, and eventually moving to Netflix for his stop-motion Pinocchio and this year's upcoming Frankenstein, another long-time dream project finally come to life. But the director has never fully given up on Mountains of Madness, hoping to one day make the film for Netflix. The thing with Mountains is, the screenplay I co-wrote 15 years ago is not the screenplay I would do now. So I need to do a rewrite, said Del Toro. Not only to scale it down somehow, but because, back then, I was trying to bridge the scale of it with elements that made it somewhat be able to go through the studio machinery. In recent years, the director has said he'd love to make the adaptation as a stop-motion film, even going so far as to contact fellow stop-motion madman, and no stranger to lifelong passion projects that destroy your soul, Phil Tippett, about helping him make the movie. Will Guillermo Del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness ever get made? If it does, it will be from a struggle worthy of Cthulhu himself. Thanks for watching today's video, and it's about that time for another Unmade script. You may already know that earlier this year I did videos covering Steven Spielberg's Night Skies and the unmade sequel to The Thing. And when I decided to make this video, I didn't realize that I was going to be making another Thing video. That was really not part of my plan. But when reviewing this script, I couldn't help but see so many parallels to John Carpenter's film, and I really do think that hurts this movie overall. Like I said in the video, I have no idea why Del Toro and Robbins decided to make a Thing homage instead of an actual Mountains of Madness adaptation, because this really has barely anything to do with that novella besides some shared setup and a few different elements with characters and monsters. In the end, I'm kinda glad that this version of this movie did not get made. I'm sure the creatures would have looked cool and the sets would have been awesome, but this movie probably would not have had much else going for it besides those factors. I am really interested in Del Toro eventually revisiting this, and rewriting the script a lot, because I think there's room for a lot of improvement. A stop-motion animated version could actually be really cool and really unconventional, and make these monsters really look totally different than anything else you've seen on screen before. But in this version, they really do seem like Botine's Thing creatures, although maybe the old ones would have looked really unique. All to say, it is an interesting idea, but it's best left as a what if. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this version of At the Mountains of Madness, your favorite Del Toro movies, and what you'd like to see from a proper HP Lovecraft adaptation. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon or YouTube membership, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and gazing into the abyss.